Historically known as the roundabout of the ancient world, Afghanistan has served for millennia as a vital civilizational hub, evolving from prehistoric farming communities and the Indus Valley civilization into a central node of the Silk Road. Under the influence of the Achaemenid Persians, Alexander the Great, and the Kushan Empire, the region became a melting pot for Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, and Hinduism, a cultural synthesis famously symbolized by the giant Bamiyan Buddhas. By the 9th century, Islam became the dominant force, paving the way for the Ghaznavid and Timurid dynasties to transform cities like Ghazni and Herat into global epicenters of art and science. The transition to a modern state began in 1747 when Ahmad Shah Durrani unified the tribes, though the 19th century saw the nation squeezed as a strategic buffer between the British and Russian empires during the Great Game. Despite enduring 3 wars with Britain, Afghanistan maintained its independence, eventually entering a golden age of stability and modernization under King Zahir Shah from 1933 to 1973. +1. This era of peace was shattered by the late 20th century, beginning with a 1978 communist coup and the subsequent 1979 Soviet invasion. The ensuing decade of proxy warfare between the Soviet Union and the US-backed Mujahideen left the country in ruins, leading to a vacuum that allowed the Taliban to seize power in 1996. Following the 9/11 attacks and a 20-year democratic experiment under the Afghan Republic, the landscape shifted once more with the U.S. withdrawal in August 2021. As of March 2026, the Taliban have consolidated an Islamic Emirate governed from Kandahar, characterized by severe restrictions on female education and a deepening economic collapse. Most critically, the nation is now embroiled in a sudden, open war with Pakistan. Following Pakistan's February 2026 declaration of hostilities and subsequent airstrikes on Kabul and Kandahar, violent clashes along the Durrani Line have displaced over 115,000 people in just 1 month. This new conflict, combined with the persistent 5-year drought and mounting civilian casualties, has pushed the country into its most volatile humanitarian and security crisis in decades. Geographically, Afghanistan remains a landlocked mountain fortress in the heart of Asia, dominated by the massive Hindu Kush range, which covers nearly 75% of the country. This rugged terrain, while historically serving as a natural defense, has become a primary driver of the nation's 2026 humanitarian crisis. The country is currently grappling with water bankruptcy, a catastrophic drop in groundwater levels that has left nearly half of Kabul's wells dry and decimated 80% of rain-fed crops across the northern plains and southern plateaus. This environmental strain is compounded by a persistent 5-year drought and rapid deforestation in the eastern highlands, leading to a cycle of soil erosion and devastating flash floods. Despite these challenges, the Afghan landscape holds immense untapped potential, often referred to as the Saudi Arabia of lithium, due to mineral deposits estimated at over $1 trillion. These resources, concentrated in regions like Ghazni and Logar, have made the country's difficult geography a focal point for global green energy interests, particularly from China. However, the same porous and vertical terrain that hides these riches also complicates the current, open war along the 2,670 kilometers Durrani Line. As of March 2026, the high-altitude passes of the Hindu Kush and the strategic narrowness of the Wakhan Corridor, which touches Tajikistan, Pakistan, and China, remain some of the most volatile and geologically significant transit points in the world. In 2026, Afghanistan's demography reflects a nation in a state of extreme flux, defined by a massive youth bulge and one of the world's largest displacement crises. The population has grown to approximately 48.6 million, with a staggering median age of just 18 years, making it one of the youngest populations on the planet. This demographic pressure is compounded by the fact that nearly 5 million Afghans have been forced to return from Pakistan and Iran over the last 2 years, many of whom are now living in makeshift settlements in a country where 45% of the population faces acute food insecurity. The social fabric of this population is also undergoing a profound shift due to the Taliban's restrictive governance. While the country remains ethnically diverse, composed of Pashtun, Tajiks, Hazaras, and Uzbeks, the the demographic future of its women and girls is at a breaking point. With the ban on female education entering its fifth year in 2026, an entire generation of young women is being demographically sidelined from the workforce, a move that the UN estimates has already cost the Afghan economy billions in potential GDP. Furthermore, the open war with Pakistan has triggered a new wave of internal displacement, with over 115,000 people fleeing border regions in March 2026 alone, further straining the resources of already overcrowded urban centers like Kabul and Kandahar. Afghanistan remains one of the world's most complex and fragile nations, caught between an isolated domestic reality and a sudden, violent military escalation on its borders. Since February 2026, the country has been embroiled in an open war with Pakistan, marked by airstrikes in major cities like Kabul and Kandahar and intense clashes along the Durand Line. This conflict has already resulted in hundreds of civilian casualties and the displacement of over 115,000 people in March alone, severely disrupting trade routes and humanitarian aid at a time when the nation is already reeling from a 5-year drought and a 6th consecutive year of water bankruptcy. Socially and economically, the country faces what many international observers call gender apartheid. Afghanistan is the only nation in the world where girls and women are systematically barred from secondary and higher education, a policy now in its 5th year that has stripped millions of their right to learn and work. This structured erasure of women from public life has not only created a healthcare catastrophe due to the lack of female medical professionals, but has also crippled the economy, which remains in a state of stagnant deflation. Despite this, a resilient underground network of clandestine schools and a struggling private sector continue to resist, even as 45% of the population, roughly 21.9 million people, rely on dwindling international assistance to survive. The Afghan economy operates as a paradoxical dual system, where the country is simultaneously a mineral superpower on paper and a humanitarian catastrophe in practice. While the Taliban have successfully centralized revenue collection and stabilized the currency, the lack of access to the global SWIFT banking system has forced the entire nation to rely on the ancient, informal Hawala network for international trade and survival. This financial isolation is intensified by the Saudi Arabia of lithium narrative. Though the soil contains over $1 trillion in critical minerals like copper and lithium, the infrastructure required to extract them is non-existent, and the current open war with Pakistan has made the necessary foreign investment a high-stakes gamble. The most devastating blow to the economy, however, is the collapse of the breadbasket due to a lethal combination of water bankruptcy and shifting agricultural policies. The Taliban's successful 95% reduction in poppy cultivation has left millions of farmers without their primary source of income, and the pivot to wheat has been thwarted by a persistent 5-year drought that has dried up traditional irrigation systems. As the government attempts to solve this through the massive Kosh-Tepa Canal project in the north, a move that has sparked intense water nationalism and diplomatic friction with Uzbekistan, the average Afghan household is caught in a deflationary spiral. With the systematic exclusion of women from the workforce costing the nation an estimated $1 billion in annual GDP, the economy in 2026 remains a fragile structure of survival, heavily dependent on the very regional trade routes currently threatened by border warfare. The cultural and spiritual landscape of Afghanistan is defined by a profound tension between a state-imposed religious orthodoxy and the resilient, multi-ethnic traditions of its people. The Taliban has codified its vision into a new criminal regulation as of early 2026, which formalizes the Hanafi school of Sunni Islam as the absolute source of law, effectively designating religious minorities and dissenters as heretics or apostates. This shift has placed immense pressure on the Shia Hazara community, whose religious ceremonies and educational institutions face increasing surveillance and restriction. Public life is strictly governed by virtue and vice, edicts that have reached a new extreme in 2026, with women now prohibited from even reciting the Quran in their homes if their voices can be heard by men, a move the international community describes as the structured erasure of women from the national culture. Beneath this rigid surface, the hidden pulse of Afghan identity survives through the ancient code of Pashanwali, where values of tribal honor and legendary hospitality, Melmastia, often carry more weight in rural villages than central government decrees. While the public square has been silenced, the national passion for poetry remains a vital tool for resistance, with clandestine digital groups and private literary circles preserving a heritage that state censorship cannot reach. Traditional sports like buzkashi, the high-energy national game of goat grabbing, have seen a resurgence in 2026, serving as one of the few remaining public spaces where ethnic pride and traditional masculinity are celebrated outside of a purely religious context. In the privacy of the walled compound, the diverse threads of Tajik, Uzbek, and Pashtun culture are fiercely protected, keeping the spirit of a 1,000-year-old mosaic alive in a season of uniform shadows.